Have you ever seen a mother slap her own son across the face at his sister's wedding, in front of 200 guests? Not a quiet argument, not a private fight, a slap, on stage, under crystal chandeliers, in a ballroom filled with Boston judges, senior partners, venture capitalists, and every name that matters in Beacon Hill. That was me, March 15th, 2024. The Fairmont Ballroom glowing gold, my sister's black tie wedding to a man whose last name opened doors in this city. My mother took the microphone and announced that I had a surprise wedding gift. Then she held up a transfer packet, deed papers for my $2.1 million Seaport penthouse, already printed with my name on the signature line. All Ethan has to do, she told the room, smiling like a queen granting mercy, is sign. I said no. The sound of her hand hitting my face echoed sharper than the champagne glasses. My cufflinks skidded across the marble floor. 200 people watched, frozen between shock and curiosity. They expected me to explode, or apologize, or fold like I always had. Instead, I bent down, picked up the cufflink, fixed my sleeve, and looked at her. Then I walked out. In the lobby, I made one phone call. 1 hour later, the woman my mother had told everyone was confused, fragile, practically gone, walked into that ballroom with her attorney and a file thick enough to destroy everything my mother had built. And that's when the wedding stopped being a celebration. It became a reckoning. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March 2021. I was in my one-bedroom apartment in South Boston, halfway through reviewing structural load calculations for a mixed-use project, when my grandmother's name lit up my screen. "Ethan," she said, "no small talk. I'm updating my will. You need to listen carefully." My grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, had taught constitutional law at Columbia for 34 years before retiring to Boston. She didn't dramatize. She didn't ramble. When she said something mattered, it did. "I'm leaving you the Seaport penthouse." I leaned back in my chair. Why me, not disbelief? Confusion. "Because you show up," she said simply. "Every Sunday for 10 years. You fix my Wi-Fi. You bring that terrible black coffee I like. You sit with me even when I repeat myself." She paused. "Your mother sends flowers on holidays. Your sister sends nothing." The penthouse had been purchased in 2015 for $1.7 million. By 2021 it was worth over $2 million. Floor-to-ceiling windows, harbor view. The kind of property people leverage for status. "I don't need it," I said. "That's precisely why you'll keep it," she replied. "You're the only one who never asked for it." The paperwork, she explained, would be finalized through her longtime attorney, Daniel Mercer. Everything legal, everything airtight. Then she added, almost clinically, "Your mother will not respond well." She was right. Within weeks, the news reached my family. I never found out how. Boston's legal and social circles overlap in ways most people don't realize. What I did know was this: I had never once discussed money with my grandmother. I never hinted, never suggested. I visited because I respected her mind, because she treated me like an equal long before anyone else did. She challenged me, asked about my projects, critiqued my reasoning, made me defend my ideas. The penthouse wasn't a reward, it was trust. And when my mother and sister reacted, it wasn't outrage over fairness. It was fury that something valuable had slipped beyond their control. That was the moment the fault line formed. We just didn't know yet how violent the earthquake would be. By April 2021, my mother organized what she called a family conversation. It was a hearing. Her brownstone in Back Bay had been staged like a courtroom. My father sat in his usual leather chair by the window. My sister, Caroline, perched on the arm of the sofa. Posture perfect, engagement ring already catching light like it was part of the decor. My mother stood when I entered, then slowly sat, as if signaling that proceedings were about to begin. "Ethan," she said evenly, "we need to address your grandmother's condition." Condition. I didn't sit until they stopped looking at me like I was on trial. "She seems fine," I replied. My father folded his hands. "Leaving a multi-million-dollar property to one grandchild and excluding the rest suggests impaired judgment." "She's not excluding anyone," I said. "She's making a decision." Caroline exhaled sharply. "You manipulated her." That was the first time the accusation surfaced openly. "You've been spending an unusual amount of time there," my mother added. "Isolation is a classic tactic." "Isolation?" I almost laughed. "I visit her on Sundays." "For 10 years," Caroline snapped. "Don't pretend that's normal." My father cleared his throat, adopting the calm tone he used in depositions. The appropriate solution would be for you to decline the inheritance. Or, at minimum, agree to sell the property and divide the proceeds evenly among family members. There it was. Not concern. Not fairness. Distribution. I'm not declining anything, I said, and I'm not selling. The air shifted. My mother's expression hardened in a way I'd seen only twice before. Once when a partner publicly challenged her in court. Once when I told her I wasn't applying to law school. Then, understand this, she said quietly. If you insist on keeping something that destabilizes this family, there will be consequences. They came quickly. By June, I had been removed from the family group chat. I found out about Caroline's engagement party from LinkedIn photos. Crystal chandeliers. Harbor Club. The caption read, Future Whitman. No invitation. When I asked my father about it, he said, "We assumed you were busy." Busy. The narrative escalated from there. At charity events. I overheard fragments. He's been influencing Margaret for years. Elderly people can be impressionable. It's sad when greed fractures a family. My mother never accused me directly in public. She implied. She sighed. She let others fill in blanks. At a fundraising dinner in October, a partner from her firm approached me with a sympathetic look. "Family disputes are complicated," he said. "Sometimes the honorable thing is to step aside, as if I were occupying something temporarily." Caroline leaned into it. She told mutual acquaintances that I was confused about priorities, that I'd always struggled with loyalty. Meanwhile, my business referrals began thinning. Quietly. No confrontation. Just fewer returned calls. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't counter the rumors. I believed facts would prevail. That legal documents mattered more than social whispers. I was wrong. Silence wasn't dignity. It was oxygen. And they used it. Holidays passed without invitations. Thanksgiving, Christmas, my birthday. In December 2021, my grandmother moved into Silver Grove Senior Living in Newton. She said she wanted less maintenance, fewer stairs. But, during my Sunday visits, I noticed something different in her eyes. Not confusion. Calculation. Did something happen? I asked her once. She looked out over the landscaped courtyard for a long time. "Some truths," she said carefully, "require patience." I let it go. I shouldn't have. For nearly 3 years, my mother operated unchecked. She reshaped the narrative, repositioned me as unstable, opportunistic, distant. By the time Caroline's wedding invitations were mailed in late 2023, I had been effectively erased, which is why the envelope felt less like reconciliation and more like a summons. When my grandmother moved into Silver Grove in late 2021, the official explanation was simplicity. Less upkeep, she said, more quiet. Silver Grove wasn't a downgrade. $12,000 a month, private dining, on-site medical staff, discreet security. It was where wealthy families placed relatives when optics mattered. But something felt off. On Sundays, I'd bring her coffee and sit by the wide bay windows overlooking the gardens. She still debated Supreme Court opinions with surgical precision, still corrected my assumptions mid-sentence. Her mind was intact, yet, whenever I mentioned my mother, her posture changed. Not weakness, guardedness. Once, I asked directly, "Did she pressure you about the will?" My grandmother held my gaze longer than usual. "Ethan," she said carefully, "there are battles that require preparation before confrontation." That wasn't denial. That was strategy. After that, she never spoke negatively about my mother. Never defended her either. She simply observed. Waited. For nearly 3 years, an invisible tension hung between us, like she was holding a document she wasn't ready to file. I assumed it was about the penthouse. I didn't realize the penthouse was only a surface dispute. The real betrayal was older and far more dangerous. The invitation arrived in December 2023. Heavy ivory cardstock, embossed gold lettering. Caroline Whitman and Thomas Whitman request the honor. After 2 years of silence, no holidays, no calls, no acknowledgement that I existed, I was suddenly invited to the most public event of the decade. I stared at it for a full minute before opening the details card. Black tie. Fairmont Copley Plaza, March 15th, 2024. That same evening, my phone rang. "Ethan," my mother said, her voice warmer than it had been in years. "I do hope you received Caroline's invitation." I did. "This wedding is an opportunity," she continued smoothly. "For healing, for unity, for the Whitmore name to appear whole." There it was, Image first. Silence stretched between us before she added, almost casually, we should revisit our earlier discussion. The penthouse, I said. Yes. No denial. No shame. Caroline and Thomas will need a residence appropriate for their position. His father is senior partner at Grant & Kessler. They entertain. They host judges, investors. The penthouse reflects that level. It reflects my grandmother's decision. It reflects what is best for this family, she corrected. You're not married. You don't host galas. You don't leverage real estate for influence. Meaning, I didn't serve the narrative. You could transfer it as a wedding gift, she said softly. Imagine how that would look. Generous, loyal, strong. Or weak, I replied. The warmth vanished. Caroline deserves a proper beginning, she said. You're a man. You can rebuild. She cannot rebuild reputation. So, that was the real currency. I'm not transferring anything, I said. Her tone hardened into something metallic. Think carefully. Refusing publicly will have consequences. The guest list includes half the people who shape business in this city. You don't want to be seen as the son who fractured his sister's wedding. There it was. If I attended and refused, I'd be humiliated in front of 200 of her curated witnesses. If I didn't attend, she would frame it as guilt. Either way, I would be positioned as the villain. After we hung up, I sat in my office long after dark. I considered not going. I considered protecting myself quietly, but something in me rejected that. I had done nothing wrong. I would not hide. I RSVP'd yes, not because I trusted them, because I understood the trap and decided to walk into it anyway. 1 week before the wedding, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. My grandmother. Ethan, she said without greeting. If something happens at that reception, you are to call Daniel Mercer immediately. I was still half asleep. What kind of something? The kind your mother believes she can control. That woke me up. She gave me the number again. Slowly. I already had it saved. But I wrote it down anyway. Daniel has everything, she continued. Certified copies, reports, documentation of what? A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Of a matter I hoped would resolve itself privately, she said. It did not. My grip tightened on the phone. Are you in danger? No, she said calmly. But your mother is overconfident. She thinks narrative is stronger than evidence. And it isn't. It depends who activates the evidence. Silence stretched between us. If she corners you publicly, my grandmother said, her voice turning steel-edged, do not sign anything, do not argue. Call Daniel. Tell him the file is required. The file? I asked. You'll understand when you need to, she softened then. I love you, Ethan. Whatever happens next, remember that. When the call ended, my hands weren't shaking, they were steady. That unsettled me more. March 15, 2024. 5:02 p.m. The Fairmont Copley Plaza looked like a monument to inherited power. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Gold-trimmed columns, crystal chandeliers refracting light like something sacred. Inside the ballroom, everything was precision. White orchids cascading from tall glass cylinders. A 12-piece string ensemble playing Cole Porter. Servers moving in synchronized lines with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. 200 guests, federal judges, senior partners, venture capitalists, trustees of foundations whose names were etched onto hospital wings. My mother's audience. I wore a tailored charcoal suit. Nothing flashy, nothing apologetic. I wasn't there to compete, I was there to stand. My father greeted me near the bar. You made it, he said. No hug. No eye contact longer than necessary. I said I would. We stood in silence that felt practiced. Caroline approached 10 minutes later, wrapped in white silk and Swarovski crystals. She hugged me carefully, as if proximity alone might stain her. You brought the documents, she asked lightly. What documents? The transfer paperwork, she said, smile unwavering. Mom said you'd be reasonable by today. Reasonable? There it was again. There are no documents, I said. Her eyes hardened instantly. Thomas and I already told the realtor we wouldn't renew the Back Bay condo. You made plans around property that isn't yours. It should be ours, she said quietly. You don't even use it properly. You work all the time. You live alone. What's the point of you having something like that status? Apparently. Required performance. Before I could answer, Thomas joined us. Polished, controlled. Ethan, he said. This doesn't have to be awkward. Families handle these things privately. Then, why bring it up tonight? He didn't answer. Instead, I noticed something else. Guests were watching. Not openly. Subtly, I caught fragments of conversation as I moved through the room. He's holding the seaport place. I heard Margaret wasn't well when she signed. Such a shame when sons lose perspective. The narrative had been seeded long before tonight. I stepped out onto the balcony for air. The March wind cut sharp against my face. Copley Square glowed below in early evening light. My phone buzzed. My grandmother. "I assume it's begun," she said. "They expected me to bring a deed transfer." Of course they did. There was no surprise in her voice. "Ethan," she continued, "I need to tell you something now." I had hoped I wouldn't. The air shifted. 6 months ago, a former colleague's son, an investigative reporter, contacted me. He had questions about a property transaction in 2020. My pulse slowed. "What transaction?" "The Cape Cod house." My stomach tightened. "I never sold it," she said evenly. I stared at the skyline. "What do you mean you never sold it?" "I mean your mother filed a sale for $910,000 using my signature." The world did not tilt. It narrowed. "That's not possible." "It is," she replied. "I was in Mass General recovering from hip surgery the week those documents were signed." Silence. "I hired a forensic document firm," she continued. "They analyzed the signatures. Probability of forgery 98.7%. The number hit harder than the accusation. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted her to confess." "And she didn't?" "No." The wind whipped around us. "Daniel Mercer has the forensic report," she said. "The hospital records, the transaction logs. If your mother escalates tonight, she exposes herself." "So this isn't about the penthouse?" "No," my grandmother said quietly. "The penthouse is leverage. The house in Cape Cod is the crime." I closed my eyes for a second. "She thinks she controls the room," I said. "She controls perception," my grandmother corrected. "Not evidence." "If she pushes," she added, "you call Daniel. He knows what to do. And you, the I will come. You shouldn't." "I've waited 3 years," she said. "I won't wait longer." The call ended. I stood there for another 10 seconds. My mother hadn't just smeared me. She had forged her own mother's signature. She had called Margaret confused, unstable, not to protect her, to discredit her. I walked back inside the ballroom. The music felt louder now. Artificial. My mother stood near the head table, scanning the room like a conductor about to cue a crescendo. She caught my eye, smiled, confident. She believed tonight would cement her narrative permanently. She had no idea that evidence was already waiting in a leather briefcase downtown. Dinner concluded. At 7:28 p.m. champagne was refilled. My mother rose slowly, tapping her fork against her glass. The room quieted on command. "Before we conclude this beautiful evening," she began, voice warm and practiced, "there is one more family tradition we would like to honor." I didn't move, but I understood. The stage was set, and this time, I wasn't walking into it blind. My mother stood beneath the chandelier like she owned gravity itself. "If I may have everyone's attention," she said into the microphone, voice smooth and deliberate. "The Whitmore family believes in legacy, in sacrifice, in supporting one another as we rise." Polite applause rippled across the room. She extended her hand toward me. "Ethan, would you join us?" 200 faces turned in unison. If I refused, I would confirm her narrative. If I complied, I would enter her arena. I walked forward. Each step felt measured, not hesitant, controlled. She placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture affectionate to the crowd, possessive to me. "As many of you know," she continued, "Margaret left Ethan a remarkable property in the Seaport District, a penthouse valued at approximately $2.1 million. Murmurs, interest, calculation. Tonight," she said, smiling at Caroline and Thomas, "Ethan has the opportunity to demonstrate what true brotherhood looks like." She reached behind the podium and lifted a thick folder. "Transfer of deed. Quitclaim agreement. My name already printed beneath the signature line. All he needs to do," she said brightly, "is sign." The room applauded. They believed they were witnessing generosity, not coercion. I leaned toward the microphone. "I'm not signing that." The applause died instantly. My mother's fingers tightened slightly against my back. "Don't be dramatic," she murmured. But the microphone carried it. "It's paperwork. It's ownership," I said. "And it isn't yours to distribute." Caroline stepped forward, veil shimmering. "You're really doing this?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to sound wounded. "On my wedding day, you scheduled this," I replied calmly. "Not me." Gasps scattered across the tables. My mother's smile thinned. "Ethan," she said, voice sharpening. This family has supported you your entire life. No, I answered. Grandmother did. The word landed like a stone. You ungrateful child, she hissed. Forgetting the microphone still amplified every syllable. After everything we invested in you, you invested in image, I said evenly. Not me. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. His father looked at the documents more closely now. My mother's composure fractured. This apartment reflects this family's stature, she snapped. You don't even need it. You live alone. You don't host. You don't elevate the Whitmore name. It was never about elevation, I replied. It was about trust. Her hand moved before I registered the intent. The slap cracked through the room, not loud, precise. My head turned slightly with the force, my cufflink tore loose and slid across the marble floor. Complete silence. No music. No murmurs. 200 people holding their breath. I could feel the sting rising across my cheek, heat spreading beneath the skin. For a split second, instinct flared anger, humiliation, the primitive urge to react. I didn't. I bent down, picked up the cufflink, straightened it carefully, fastened it back onto my sleeve. When I stood, I met her eyes. That, I said into the microphone, voice steady, is the last time you put your hands on me. The words didn't echo. They settled. My mother looked momentarily unsure, which was the first genuine emotion I had seen from her all evening. I stepped away from the podium. No rushing. No retreat. Just departure. Whispers erupted behind me as I walked down the aisle between tables. Chairs scraped softly. Someone muttered, Jesus. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a muted thud. In the lobby, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I walked to a velvet bench near the concierge desk and sat down. For the first time, all night, I exhaled fully. My cheek throbbed. But my mind was clear. She had crossed the line publicly. She had chosen spectacle over restraint, which meant she had activated what she didn't know was waiting. I took out my phone, dialed Daniel Mercer. It rang once. Mercer and Associates. This is Ethan Whitmore, I said calmly. Tell Margaret the file is required. A pause. Understood. Mr. Whitmore. She's on her way. I ended the call and leaned back against the velvet cushion. 1 hour. That's all it would take. 1 hour for perception to collide with evidence. 1 hour for the woman who believed she controlled narrative to discover she no longer controlled outcome. Upstairs, the wedding continued in fragments. Down here, I waited. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one on trial anymore. At 8:46 p.m., the ballroom doors opened again. Conversations were already fractured. Clusters of guests whispered over half-finished champagne. My mother stood rigid near the head table, replaying her version of events to anyone within range. Then the room shifted. Margaret Whitmore entered slowly, leaning on a polished oak cane, posture upright despite the measured pace of her steps. She wore a dark wool coat over a simple black dress. No spectacle, no apology. Beside her walked Daniel Mercer, charcoal suit, leather briefcase in hand. For a full 3 seconds, no one spoke. My mother turned. The color drained from her face. Mom, the word came out strangled. You weren't invited, I'm aware, my grandmother replied calmly. I invited myself. Every guest who mattered was watching now. Margaret stepped forward until she stood in the center of the ballroom floor. My name, she said clearly, projecting without a microphone, is Margaret Whitmore. I taught constitutional law for 34 years. I am of sound mind, and I am here to clarify 2 matters. The silence deepened. First, she continued, the penthouse at 88 Seaport Avenue was legally and intentionally left to my grandson, Ethan Whitmore. In my will dated June 3, 2019, that will remains valid, uncontested, and properly filed. Daniel opened the briefcase and withdrew a certified document. This is a notarized copy, he said evenly, filed with Suffolk County Probate Court. I have represented Mrs. Whitmore for 22 years. A murmur rippled through the attorneys in the room. Recognition, confirmation. My mother forced a laugh. This is unnecessary. We were simply discussing a family gift. Margaret ignored her. Second, she said, voice sharpening, a property in Cape Cod held in my name until September 2020 was sold for $910,000. Daniel withdrew another set of papers. I did not authorize that sale. My grandmother continued. I did not sign those documents. I was hospitalized at Massachusetts General during the week the transaction was executed. A wave of stillness passed across the crowd. Daniel held up a report. This is a forensic handwriting analysis conducted by Northeastern Forensic Services. The conclusion: the signature on the deed transfer is inconsistent with Mrs. Whitmore's authenticated handwriting. Probability of forgery, 98.7%. The number hung in the air like a verdict. My mother's composure disintegrated. "That's absurd," she snapped. "She's confused. She doesn't understand." "I understand perfectly," Margaret interrupted. "I also understand Massachusetts law." She took one deliberate step forward. "Forgery and fraudulent conveyance carry significant penalties. This entire file has already been forwarded to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office." Gasps broke through the room. Thomas's father, senior partner at Grant and Kessler, stared at the documents with undisguised alarm. Two judges near the back exchanged glances. My father stepped backward instinctively. "I didn't know," he said, voice thin. "You signed the transfer." My mother hissed. "I signed what you put in front of me." 35 years of marriage fractured in less than 10 seconds. Caroline looked between them. Mascara streaking now. Confusion overtaking performance. "Mom, what is she talking about?" My mother had no answer. Margaret turned slowly. Addressing the room, "For 3 years," she said, "I remained silent. I hoped my daughter would correct her mistake privately. Instead, she chose to publicly accuse my grandson of manipulation, of greed, of exploiting me." She looked directly at my mother. "You did not lose me tonight. You lost me the day I confirmed what you had done." The sentence landed heavier than the forensic report. The ballroom no longer felt like a wedding. It felt like arraignment. Daniel closed the briefcase. "If there are further questions," he said calmly, "they can be directed through counsel." My grandmother walked toward me then. Her expression wasn't triumphant, it was resolute. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly, noticing the faint mark on my cheek. "I am now," I replied. Behind us, my mother's voice rose into incoherent denial. But no one was listening anymore. The narrative she had built for years collapsed in under 5 minutes. Not because I fought her, because evidence did. We made it to the lobby before Thomas caught up with us. His composure was thinner now, less polished. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, addressing my grandmother directly, "perhaps there's a way to handle this discreetly. Families resolve matters without escalation." "There is no misunderstanding," she replied evenly. "There is documentation." Thomas lowered his voice. "If the Cape Cod issue becomes public, it affects more than one person. Reputations, firms, partnerships. That concern should have existed before the signature was forged," Daniel said calmly. Thomas's jaw tightened. "And the penthouse?" he asked, unable to mask it now. "It belongs to Ethan," my grandmother answered. "And will continue to." Daniel stepped slightly between them. "I would advise returning to your reception. Any further statements may become relevant." Thomas retreated, without another word. Outside, the March air felt sharper than before. Inside that ballroom, the collapse accelerated. Within 2 weeks, my mother was formally summoned to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office for questioning regarding the 2020 Cape Cod sale. The interview lasted nearly 4 hours. Her longtime tennis partner and attorney, who had initially agreed to represent her, quietly withdrew from the case days later. "Conflict of interest," the explanation read. "In reality, evidence has gravity." My father moved out of the Back Bay house before the end of March. The Ritz-Carlton, temporary residence, public statement released through a mutual contact. He had no knowledge of any irregular transactions and was cooperating fully. Whether that was true became irrelevant. His signature was on the documents. Caroline and Thomas postponed their honeymoon indefinitely. Grant and Kessler initiated an internal review regarding potential exposure. Thomas's father stopped attending social events for several weeks. On April 3rd, my mother received notice from the Boston Legal Heritage Foundation, where she had served as gala chair for 16 consecutive years, that her participation was under administrative review. Translation: she was disinvited. The Boston Bar Association opened an ethics inquiry after 2 attorneys who attended the wedding filed formal complaints, citing conduct involving alleged document fraud. Then, the Boston Globe published a short legal beat item: prominent Boston attorney under investigation for alleged fraudulent conveyance in 2020 property transaction. No name listed, none needed. In Boston's legal community, anonymity lasts hours. Invitations stopped. Board seats were reconsidered. Whispers replaced applause. The social structure my mother spent 3 decades constructing began to dismantle with precise efficiency. She had weaponized perception. Now perception turned on her. A certified letter arrived in early May notifying her that the Cape Cod property sale was under formal legal review. If voided, the current owners could pursue financial recovery. The potential liability exceeded $900,000. The penthouse had been leverage, the Cape Cod house was exposure. And the exposure carried consequences. I won't pretend I felt nothing. There was satisfaction in watching a system correct itself. But it wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. She believed humiliation would force compliance. Instead, it forced scrutiny. And scrutiny revealed truth. The first apology came 3 days after the wedding. A text from someone who had once avoided eye contact at a charity gala. I believed things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Over the next month, similar messages arrived, some cautious, some direct. A few transparent attempts to realign socially. I responded to very few. What mattered wasn't their regret, it was the shift. In April, I received an email from a managing director at a private equity firm who had attended the wedding. Subject line, office renovation inquiry. He acknowledged, without naming specifics, that he had misjudged me. Then he asked if I would consider overseeing the structural redesign of their new conference floor. Budget $96,000. Largest contract I had ever been offered. I took the meeting, not because I needed validation, because I recognized opportunity. Word traveled quickly through the same circles that once closed against me. But this time the narrative was different. Not manipulative grandson, not unstable heir. Instead, composed, didn't flinch, handled himself, reputation. I realized, is rarely about perfection. It's about how you behave when tested publicly. I became selective. I vetted every referral carefully. Declined 2 projects where the interest felt less about design and more about access to information. I wasn't rebuilding trust with them. I was building standards for myself. Meanwhile, the Cape Cod investigation progressed. Title review, forensic confirmations, potential civil recovery. Every development tightened the pressure on my mother's position, but my focus shifted elsewhere. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was expanding. By June, my project calendar was full through winter. The penthouse no longer felt like contested territory. It felt like foundation. Not because I had won, but because I had stood still when pressure demanded collapse. And that changed everything. June 2024, I'm standing on the balcony of the penthouse at sunset. Boston Harbor stretches out in sheets of copper and blue. The water catching fire under the last light of the day. The city hums below steady. Indifferent. Alive. Margaret sits across from me in a low chair. A glass of red wine resting lightly in her hand. She comes every Sunday now. Not because she has to. Because she wants to. My father called last week. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that sounded rehearsed. Said he wanted to explain. Said he didn't know about the Cape Cod house. Said he signed what he was told to sign. That may even be true. But ignorance and innocence aren't the same thing. He called again 2 days later. This time, I answered. I need time. I told him. For what he asked. For you to decide whether you want a relationship with me or whether you just want relief from discomfort. Silence. I'm not meeting you until you understand the difference. We ended the call there. Caroline texted once, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. When I did, it was simple. If we talk, it will be about truth, not optics. No reply after that. On the balcony, Margaret studies me quietly. "You're not angry," she observes. "I was," I say. "Now I'm clear. There's a difference. Anger burns fast. Clarity stays." I started therapy in April. Every Tuesday at 4. Family systems, boundaries, accountability. For years, I confused restraint with loyalty. Silence with maturity. It wasn't maturity. It was avoidance. Margaret nods when I tell her that. "Love without respect," she says, "isn't love. It's habit." I finish. She smiles. The penthouse is quiet at night in a way I never noticed before. Not lonely, just still. I've begun hosting small dinners, nothing performative. Architects, developers, a woman named Claire I met at a sustainability conference in May. She's an environmental attorney. Direct. Observant. Completely unimpressed by Beacon Hill lineage. She asked about the wedding once. I told her the truth. She didn't flinch. That mattered more than sympathy ever could. The legal process regarding the Cape Cod house continues. Civil recovery is likely. Criminal charges remain under review. Whatever happens next belongs to the system now, not to me. I don't wake up thinking about it anymore. The penthouse was never about square footage. It was about autonomy. It was proof that someone saw me clearly and chose me intentionally. Below us, the city lights flicker on one by one. Margaret finishes her wine and sets the glass down. You know, she says, I spent too many years preserving peace at the expense of truth. I listen. I thought silence protected family. It doesn't. It protects dysfunction. The wind shifts gently across the balcony. I don't want that for you, she says. I want you to choose honesty even when it costs you access. I will, I answer. And I mean it. My life now is structured around different metrics, not approval, not inheritance, not performance, consistency, integrity, choice. The penthouse is mine, not because I fought harder, because I refused to surrender what wasn't theirs to take. My grandmother loves me. My business is growing. My boundaries are firm, and for the first time in my life, I understand that protecting your peace isn't aggression. It's alignment. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been pressured to sacrifice yourself for someone else's image, leave a comment. Share your experience. And remember, respect is not negotiable. Thank you for being here. This story was created by the Fish Tells Stories team for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice or encouragement to replicate any actions described.